Starting this Saturday, June 1st, and going until September 8th, the WAG-Qaumajuq is presenting a fabulous new exhibit that showcases the work of one of the most historical and influential painters in Canadian history. Called Riopelle Crossroads in Time, this show is a retrospective of the work of the artist and progressive thinker Jean-Paul Riopelle. The exhibit showcases all facets of his creative output. It also demonstrates the huge impact that Riopelle had on abstract artists of today and the reason his art can be seen all over the world. This is an exhibit that was put together for the National Art Gallery in Ottawa for a 2023 show that celebrated the 100th anniversary of Riopelle's birth. And now this excellent show has made its way here to Winnipeg for the summer. And joining me here in the Classic 107 studio, I am joined by the curator and creator of Riopelle Crossroads in Time exhibit, Sylvie Lecerte. Hey, Sylvie, nice to have you here. Nice to meet you.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we get to the show, I want to talk about Riopelle himself. He is a super interesting guy. He was arguably not only influential in all things art, but he also very much was a progressive and very free thinker. Can you talk about him in regards to the automatistes and what this idea and the automatistes had?
Well, the automatiste group was created by Paul-Émile Bordua, who was his teacher at l'École du Meuble in Montreal, and who was also a free thinker and who wanted to go beyond all the academic type of art that was seen in Quebec at that time. And so he influenced many artists who were studying under his tutelage, and he created that group, and so they were also influenced by what was happening in Europe because so they started working in an abstract fashion, and it was not very well seen at the time in Quebec.
Yeah, I was reading about it. Apparently, they put up exhibits sort of in unusual places, and then as it gained traction, the arts started to be seen more and more, right?
Yeah, they started exhibiting in people's salon, in Montreal, and one of the persons that greeted them was the mother of two of the artists from the Automatistes, Pierre Gauvreau and Claude Gauvreau. So they did a lot of shows like that, but it was difficult for them to go in more official venues because of the way of thinking back then.
The perception. As you said, he studied under the painter Paul-Émile Bordua. The person who wrote this document called Le Refus Global, can you talk about that document and the importance that Riopelle had on the document being written and what that document essentially was?
Well, from exchanging with Bordua, who Riopelle became really close to Bordua, and seeing as he was really frustrated about the way the establishment and the church saw the arts, he encouraged Bordua to write something about how he felt, So Bordua wrote the manifesto, Refus Global, meaning total refusal in English, Riopelle also did the drawings for the cover of the manifesto. There were 400 of them that were put out by hand by all of the people from the Automatiste group, and it was an incredible scandal when it came out, and Bordua lost his job as a teacher at l'École du Meuble, and seeing as the atmosphere of the time was so terrible for them, many of them decided to leave. So Riopelle went to Paris, and Bordua went to New York, and many others also went either to New York or to Paris.
Yeah. And my understanding is it was highly critical of the Catholic Church and the conservative government.
Of Maurice Duplessis.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And it sort of started the inkling of what's now known as the Quiet Revolution, happened in the late 50s, early 60s, right?
Yeah, so it preceded the Quiet Revolution, but it certainly paved the way for the Quiet Revolution because many people of that generation later became politicians that, really, how can I say, did the Quiet Revolution.
Yeah. Started it up.
Yeah.
Riopelle, he moved to Paris in 1947, and so you've talked about it. His stuff wasn't being accepted here, and they were highly criticized. So he moved to Paris. I was also reading he sort of fostered and played up this idea of the wild Canadian in Paris. Can you talk about his time in Paris and how long was he there?
Well, he lived in France for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually went to France the first time in 1946 for several months, went back to Quebec, went back to Paris in 47, went back to Quebec again in 1948, also because his first daughter was born. And her mother's father was a doctor, and he didn't want her to give birth in the post-war Paris, And so she was born Iseult. She was born in Montreal. And then after Refus Global was published, they moved back to Paris, and so that's how it happened. And then he stayed there. So the idea of this wild Canadian came mostly from André Breton, the creator of Surrealism, who became close with Riopelle, and he called him. I don't even remember how he called him, and le trappeur supérieur, the how do you say trappeur in
the superior trapper?
Exactly. And so he hadn't looked for that, but at the same time he always remained really natural, and he never tried to sound like he was a Frenchman or anything like that.
And I was reading about him. He actually literally hunted geese in France.
In France, he did. That was a little bit later on, but yes, he was a hunter. He was a fisher, and when he started coming back to Canada in the 70s, he would go hunting and fishing in Canada, and then later on in the 70s, he went hunting and fishing in the north.
Oh, wow.
So,
just an incredible guy. So the exhibit's called Riopelle Crossroads in Time. It was put together by you. I was reading an interview that you did, and you said the National Art Gallery chose you to curate the exhibit because you were not a Riopelle specialist. Can you talk about that? And it took you 3 years to put the exhibit together. Would you call yourself a Riopelle expert now?
No. Well, no, because I didn't work all my life on Riopelle like many of the experts and specialists have. My line of work is more contemporary art, but since I'm an art historian, it was really fascinating to delve into Riopelle's realm and universe. So the gallery wanted to have a fresh look on Riopelle's practice, and they thought that by choosing a curator that wasn't an expert, it would give some kind of a different result, from having an expert do the exhibition. But needless to say, I did a lot of research because it's all very fine to not be an expert, but you have to know your stuff as well.
Yeah. But I mean, at the same time, you give a fresh pair of eyes on the whole subject matter. I also know that you wanted to have some of his lesser-known works shown in the exhibit. And when I think about that, I think about all the work it must have taken to get in touch with galleries and private collections to sort of gather these works together. How much work was it to put together the exhibit in that respect?
Well, it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun as well, you know. And as you go on in your research, you meet a lot of people, and those people, some of them who are specialists, know where to look for the works, you know. So they give you some cues to who to talk to and all of that. So I was really fortunate to meet some people that could loan us some works that had not been seen in Canada, and that haven't been seen very much either in the States or. So yeah, so it was really interesting because the more you delve into a subject, the more you discover, and the more you find that you really are not an expert.
And then, of course, I was doing some reading. Apparently, there's a Riopelle Foundation that was formed in 2019, like fairly recently, and it was formed by his daughter. Did you reach out to them at all? Were you aware of them?
Yeah. They were part of it, and the show at the NGC was part of the programming for the Riopelle year in 2023. But the exhibition was really prepared by the NGC and not by the foundation. But I was in contact with his daughter, of course, because she is the author of the Catalogue Raisonné, and has been for the last 36 years. and so she was a mine of information. She was really generous, and so it was really important that I be in contact with her. And through her, I met other people, and that that's how it goes. And it creates a network, and
Oh, perfect. When I look at Jean-Paul Riopelle's abstract paintings, the word I would use is striking. He was also a master of manipulating colors. His work it's just spectacular. His art does remind me of Jackson Pollock's work, but instead of using dropping paint like Pollock did, he used palette knives. Can you talk about that, and why did he decide to start using palette knives as a way of applying the paint to the canvas?
Because it took too long with a paintbrush, you know. So he would be able to do impasto with the knife in a thicker fashion. And he kept saying that he was not a good painter because he couldn't paint thinly, and he said maybe one day I'll learn that. But otherwise, and he didn't like to be compared to Jackson Pollock. And so the way Riopelle worked, he worked his canvases upright, whereas Pollock worked on the ground when he started the dripping, because Pollock also had an easel paint period at some point before he started doing the drippings. And it's true that Pollock started doing that before Riopelle did, because Pollock was 11 years older than Riopelle. But Riopelle really worked in his own world, and but soon after this comparison, he started to use another style and not do the crisscrossing lines across the canvases. So it was just the mosaic, applied with the palette knife.
Yeah, and one of the things I've only seen pictures of his art on the internet. And one of the things that strikes me is not only the color, but there's a textural element to the work as well, right?
Yes.
He worked in all mediums: watercolors, oils, markers, collage, sculpture, etc. Can you talk about how you put the show together, and how do you show the lifetime progression of Riopelle's creative output?
So I did, first of all, I did a survey, a retrospective from the 1940s until the 1990s when he stopped working. And I wanted to do that to show the diversity of his practice within the same decade, So in the 40s, he did some automatist works, but he also did ink and watercolors, which he pursued in the 1950s. And he used an incredible amount of media all through his life, and he never stuck to the same type of painting or art making. When he started doing the collages in the 60s, 1967 to be more precise, he worked on an incredible amount of these collages, and he was still doing ink and watercolors, and he started doing printmaking at the time, and he was actually using the prints that he didn't like to do the collages, and he was cutting them up and creating the collages. And he also started sculpting in the 60s as Alberto Giacometti urged him to do. So so he was doing all kinds of things at all times and never stayed in the same style. He was an explorer, he was a trailblazer, and he wanted to go forward all the time, even if the art world, museums or collectors didn't like the fact that he just didn't stay in the same style all the time.
Just did what he did.
Yeah,
what he
he
felt.
was a free thinker, and he didn't want to be part of a school, an artistic school or a trend or whatever. He did what he wanted.
Is the exhibit laid out chronologically?
Yes,
or,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it starts with the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, so that we can see the breadth of his styles
his work.
and the media.
One of the other things that the show does is you show art by some of his contemporaries and some artists, some living artists that are around today, to sort of demonstrate Riopelle's influence. Why was this important to you? And without giving too much away, can you talk about some of the artists' work that can be seen in the exhibit?
Well, I wanted to show the heritage that he left for the generations that followed him. And I chose some works that had a connection with his works, whether it be because some artists were really influenced by his work, and we can see it when we look at the contemporary works, or whether it was a serendipitous occurrence or metaphorical, but always it's not how can I say, gratuitous. It's really because there is a link that we can establish between those works and those of Riopelle's.
Can you talk about some of the things that inspired him in his art? I was reading, apparently he was into driving fast cars. He was also into nature. What are some of the things that he used as inspiration in his art?
Well, nature was the basis of his inspiration, and he kept saying too that he wasn't an abstract painter. Everybody says I'm an abstract painter, but abstracting something is taking something away. And he said, I'm not taking anything away. I'm adding things that I see from within nature. So he didn't feel like he was standing in front of nature, but he was in it.
Part of it,
But he also liked the city. He liked speed. He loved cars. He was really friends with his mechanic, and he had more fun being in a mechanic shop than at an opening of a show, and talking with him about the mechanic of the cars, and he sailed. Also, he was a very good sailor, and he traveled a lot. And after a bout of really intense creative activity, he would stop working altogether and go and travel, go on his sailboat, hang around with his friends and, have a good time.
And this would carry over into his art, right?
No.
No?
So, well, I mean, it was still boiling inside,
okay.
And so when he was getting back to the studio, he was ready,
Yes.
and then it was another really intensive period for him.
Of work. Now that you've been living with Jean-Paul Riopelle and his art for the past few years, what is it about his art that you particularly love, and what do you hope patrons will take away from the Riopelle Crossroads in Time exhibit?
I think that they will discover a lot of things that they didn't know about Riopelle, because most of us all know of the 1950s, and they don't know, as I didn't, about all the collages, the string game series, the prints. I mean, I discovered so many things,
Right.
and and yesterday I was giving a tour, and someone told me at the end of the tour, "Wow, this is incredible! I can't believe that only one man would have done all this all throughout the 50 years he worked." Because some artists can stay in the same style for all their lives, and that's fine too. But he wasn't like that. He just wanted to explore.
Yeah, so we're going to be great. Sylvie, this has been really, really wonderful talking to you about this exhibit and Jean-Paul Riopelle. Totally fascinating personality, and his art, as I said before, is just spectacular. Thanks for taking the time to stop by and talk to me today. This has been great.
My pleasure.
For our Classic 107 listeners, Riopelle Crossroads in Time opens this Saturday, June 1st, and goes until September 8th. For more details, visit WAG.ca or go to classic107.com. I have provided a direct link to the exhibit webpage in the article that is now up on our website. Thanks again, Sylvie.
Thank you.